So this happened a couple of years ago, and it still freaks me out when I think about it. It was late at night around 1 a.m., and me and my best friend Jake were driving home from a birthday party. We were on this long stretch of highway that barely had any streetlights. The road was mostly empty, with just our headlights cutting through the dark and the occasional car zooming by in the opposite direction. The air was cool, and I remember Jake and I were talking about random stuff, laughing about how the birthday party got wild toward the end. Suddenly, we saw blue and red lights flashing behind us. My heart skipped a beat. We were going a little over the speed limit, so I figured it was just a speeding ticket. I pulled over to the side of the road, gravel crunching under the tires. The police car looked real enough, with the lights reflecting off the dark road and the shiny surface of my side mirror. But something felt off. The car didn't look like the usual patrol cars we saw around here. It didn't have any decals or numbers, just plain and dark with lights attached to the roof. Jake leaned over and whispered, "You sure this is legit?" I didn't answer because at that moment a man stepped out of the car. He was wearing a uniform, but even in the dim light it looked wrong. No badge, no name tag, just a dark shirt and pants, and something that looked like a holster. He walked up slowly and my gut twisted. He knocked on my window and I rolled it down just enough to talk. His face was shadowed, but I could see that he had this stiff expression, eyes that didn't seem to blink much. He asked for my license and registration in a voice that was calm, but too calm. It didn't match the way real cops talk. I handed him my license, but my fingers were shaking. I glanced at Jake, who was trying to stay cool, but I could tell he was on edge. The man looked at my ID for what felt like forever, then handed it back without saying anything. He paused, his eyes darting to Jake and then back to me. "Step out of the car," he said. My heart sank. "Why?" I asked, trying not to sound as scared as I was. The man didn't answer. He just reached for the handle of my door, and that's when everything clicked in my brain. This wasn't a cop. My pulse started pounding so hard I could barely think. Jake's eyes were wide and he mouthed, "Don't." Before I knew it, Jake reached over and locked the door. The guy's face twisted, and he slammed his hand on the window. "Step out of the car," he shouted this time, louder and angrier. Adrenaline hit me like a wave, and without even thinking, I put the car in gear and hit the gas. The tires squealed as we shot forward, gravel flying behind us. I could see the fake cop running back to his car in my rearview mirror. The lights on his car were still flashing, and before I knew it, he was right behind us, headlights blinding. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the wheel. Jake was yelling, "Go, go, go," over and over, but the guy was catching up. The empty highway stretched ahead of us, dark and endless. For what felt like hours, he tailed us, his car swerving left and right like he was trying to push us off the road. I didn't know what to do. My foot was glued to the pedal and we were going way too fast, but slowing down wasn't an option. Then Jake spotted an upcoming rest stop and yelled, "Turn there!" I yanked the wheel and sped into the lot, gravel flying everywhere. The fake cop's car skidded past the turn and I took the chance to turn off my lights and hide the car behind a row of trucks parked in the lot. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst. We waited, holding our breath, watching his car speed down the highway until his lights disappeared in the distance. We didn't move for a good 10 minutes, just sitting there in stunned silence. Eventually, we called 911 and told them what happened. The real police arrived and took our statement, but they didn't find the guy. They said there had been a few reports of a fake cop in the area, trying to rob people on the highway. That night, Jake and I had to figure out a way to keep moving, but we sure as hell didn't take the highway again. We took the back roads all the way home, jumping at every shadow. Even now, I get nervous every time I see flashing lights in the rearview mirror. Alright, so this happened about a month ago, and I haven't really told many people because honestly it still freaks me out. It was a normal weeknight. Me and my girlfriend Lisa were at home in Beverly Hills. We were in bed, half watching some random show on TV while scrolling on our phones. The night outside was quiet. The kind of silence you get in a nice neighborhood, where you don't really expect anything to happen. I remember it was almost 1 a.m. when we heard this faint noise from downstairs. It was the sound of a door handle jiggling, like someone trying to open it. At first I thought maybe it was the wind or maybe some animal brushing against the porch. But then it happened again, louder this time, with a kind of urgency that made my skin crawl. I shot Lisa a look and she sat up, eyes wide. I slipped out of bed, not really sure what I was doing, but feeling that I needed to check it out. I went to the bedroom window that looked out over the front yard and driveway. When I peeked through the blinds, I saw him. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in what looked like a police uniform. He stood on our porch facing the door, one hand still gripping the handle. For a second, relief washed over me. Maybe something happened nearby and the police were here to warn us or check on us. But then it hit me. Why would a cop be trying to open our front door instead of knocking? And why was he here at 1 a.m. without a patrol car in sight? I watched as he stepped back and scanned the street, almost like he was making sure no one was watching. That's when the alarm bells in my head went from ringing to full-blown blaring. Lisa whispered, "What is it?" But I just put my hand up to signal her to stay quiet. I crept downstairs, careful to avoid the spots on the steps that creaked. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I reached the living room and turned on the light, hoping it would be enough to spook him off if he really was up to something. The glow from the lamp lit up the room but didn't reach the front door fully. For a moment, nothing happened. I held my breath and waited, listening to the absolute silence. Then a knock. 3 loud, hard thuds that echoed through the house. I stepped toward the door, stopping just before the threshold. "Hello, can I help you?" I called out, trying to sound steady. No response, just silence again, thick and heavy. I backed up a step and glanced at the peephole. The man was still there, but now he was looking straight at the door, his face serious and expressionless. I couldn't see any badge, no name tag, nothing that said he was who he was pretending to be. That's when I realized I hadn't heard a car pull up. In a neighborhood like ours, you'd hear it for sure. I started feeling this knot in my stomach, and then he did something that made my blood run cold. He reached into his pocket and pulled out what looked like a slim tool, something that could easily be used to pick a lock. At that moment, Lisa appeared at the top of the stairs and I waved her down frantically. She came over, eyes wide with fear. I whispered to her that it wasn't a real cop, and she covered her mouth, trying to keep from gasping. The lock on the door jiggled, making this metallic clicking sound, and I knew we had to act fast. We backed away into the kitchen, trying to keep quiet. Lisa grabbed her phone and dialed 911 while I tried to find anything I could use to defend us. The dispatcher answered and Lisa whispered into the phone about the man at our door. Meanwhile, we hid in the pantry, peeking out through the crack in the door. The front door handle turned slowly, and then there was silence. Moments later, we heard footsteps moving away from the house, and the tension in my chest eased up just a bit. We stayed put until we saw the blue and red lights flashing outside. The real police had arrived and the man was gone, nowhere to be found. So this happened when I was still a new cop. I don't work in law enforcement anymore, but for those 7 years I had my fair share of creepy moments. This one stands out as one of the scariest, though. I was doing a night shift, and it was around 3 a.m. The city I worked in was usually pretty chill, not much serious crime. That night it was super quiet, which I appreciated. I was just driving around in my patrol car, going through my usual area when I decided to check out this park. It was officially closed at that hour, but sometimes we got reports of weird stuff going on there. The place was surrounded by dense woods, and there was this parking lot next to a trail. I drove into the lot, which had 2 sections. The first section by the road was empty, so I moved to the second part, separated by a bit of grass and some trees. It was dark, no lights at all. My headlights swept over the empty lot, and it felt like I was alone in the middle of nowhere. I parked and just sat there for a few minutes, thinking about how peaceful the night was. Out of nowhere, I heard something hit my car. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to get my attention. I turned and squinted into the dark. I couldn't see much, but I thought I saw a shadow, like someone disappearing off the trail into the woods. That gave me an uneasy feeling. I got out of my car and called out, "Hey, who's there?" No answer. I listened really hard and heard some rustling, but it was faint, like someone moving away. Since the park was closed and there were no other cars around, I couldn't figure out how someone got there or why they'd be here at 3 a.m. I walked over to where I saw the figure and found a rock on the ground, not far from my car. I looked around with my flashlight, shining it into the woods. The trees were thick, and it was summertime, so everything was overgrown. I called out again, identifying myself as a cop, but still nothing. I stood there for a minute, my flashlight moving around the dark, twisted branches. Then, suddenly, I heard another noise from deeper in the woods. I aimed my flashlight just in time to see a rock flying toward me. I dodged, and it missed me by maybe 10 feet. I caught a glimpse of someone running off into the trees. This had gone from weird to dangerous real fast. I shouted, "Stop! Police!" and started running after them. I called in on my radio while trying to keep up, letting dispatch know someone was in the woods throwing rocks at me. The person ahead of me knew the woods way too well. I could hear them breaking branches and running further off the trail. After a few minutes, the sound stopped, and it was just me, my flashlight, and the dark. I kept looking around, calling out, but it was no use. There were a million places to hide, and it felt like the woods were swallowing me whole. After about 10 minutes of searching, I decided to head back to my car. As I was making my way out of the woods, I felt this creeping frustration mixed with relief. I was ready for backup to show up. Just as I got back to my car, still catching my breath, another rock hit my car. I spun around and caught sight of someone running back into the woods. My heart was racing again. I ran a few steps toward the trees, but then I heard them crashing away, way too deep and fast for me to follow. Backup finally arrived a couple of minutes later, and we all searched the area, flashlights lighting up the forest. But we didn't find anyone. It was like whoever it was just disappeared. To this day, I have no idea why that person was there or what their deal was. All I know is that night, for the first time on the job, I felt genuinely scared.